In order to liberate all sentient beings, let's give rise to the Supreme Bodhicitta. And today our class is on the Surangama Sutra. In fact, when I look at the Surangama Sutra, it's rather long, and I'm not sure how long I will be able to finish giving the teaching of it. For the Vimalakirti Sutra, we used 2 years, and I think this one would then be longer than 2 years. It looks quite a lot. Anyhow, let's make the aspiration, and we have already made this aspiration, so let's try to finish and complete this. And since we've already made this aspiration, I really hope that you could spare the time to listen and study this sutra. And the best way of studying and listening to sutra is to start well and complete well. So I myself also made this aspiration to finish giving the teaching. Also, I am aware that impermanence could down at any moment, and I could die at any moment. But I myself had made the aspiration, if the impermanence of death does not dawn on me, then I will continue the teaching of the Surangama Sutra. Right now, in the sutra, we are at the part where the Buddha gave a teaching of the 7 attempts of searching for the mind. This is quite important. In fact, we can look at it as a Vajrayana teaching, because it is a pointing out instruction. It is a pointing out of the nature of mind instruction. In fact, Pongso Rinpoche gave a teaching, a commentary on the pointing out of the nature of mind, composed by Mipa Rinpoche. Pongso Rinpoche stated once that this is quite an important text. He taught it once, and I myself translated it before, and earlier I've translated it again to make the language more understandable. Pongso Rinpoche composed a prologue before, at the beginning of my translation of the pointing out of the nature of mind. He stated that there are different ways of observing the nature of mind, and the way that he pointed out the instructions of watching the nature of mind is in fact rather quite similar to the 7 attempts of searching for the mind. In terms of the commentary of the Surangama Sutra, I think some of the masters didn't really compose a very detailed explanation based on the 7 attempts. However, I think we should try to watch our mind instead of just looking at different kind of commentaries. Master Jiaoguang and different masters, in terms of their commentaries, are a little bit different, and their point of views are a bit different. How is it different then? It differs from the way that they look at the different perspective of the 7 attempts of searching for the mind. Master Jiaoguang stated that the 7 attempts are looking for the place of abiding of the mind, and after the 7 attempts, it started to state about the deluded mind. You have to then find the conceptual mind and deluded mind. So that's how he looked at this instruction. But according to a different master, he said that the previous ones are about the pervasive dharma phenomena, and then the later part started talking about the dependent origination. And Master Changshui praised Master Oyi's opinion. where he said that as long as we recognize the nature of the mind, or rather the main part of the teaching of where the mind is, then it is just like you have already destroyed the place of the abiding of the mind. Then you don't have to look for other places anymore. Just as if you were to find where the mind generates, or not finding where the mind generates, then you don't really have to look further for other places of, where the mind is. And in such a way, you can directly destroy the delusion of the mind. Sometimes some of the masters give the teaching of the Tiantai school of point of view, and some of them started talking about the dependent origination aspect. And for example, Master Jiao Guang, he stated from the perspective of where the mind is and the coming and going of the mind. It's similar to the Vajrayana teaching and more close to the Ati's way of looking for the mind. So the 7 attempts of searching for the mind, I think some people feel that because all sentient beings have this grasping towards the mind, therefore they started to talk about where the abiding or the nature or the substance of the mind from the perspective of the all-pervasive habitual pattern of the grasping of sentient beings. And at the beginning, we've already talked about how the mind is not outside, is not inside, is not in the middle. And the 4th one talks about how the mind neither looks in nor outside, and mainly on the inside, and it doesn't look inside either. And from all of these perspectives, we can see, in fact, in Surangama Sutra, on one hand, we can use the observation or analysis that is used in the Buddhist logic. So you continuously ask the questions, look for where the mind is, and then eventually you'll be able to find that in fact there is no substance. The mind is in fact nowhere to be found. So Ananda continuously to pose questions, and the Buddha continuously to answer his question. So Ananda over here is just like how a scholar would pose questions. The scholars would ask questions like if the mind is outside, if the mind is inside, if the mind is in the middle. And they're trying to point that the mind has a substance. And if it has substance, then how it manifests such kind of substance, how it works with such kind of substance. So I think these kind of questions are quite important, because we can't have blind faith. We have to have faith, but the faith that we have should be built on wisdom. It cannot be built completely up on blind faith or blindness. Otherwise, it is superstition rather than faith. So our faith should be built up on detailed analysis and observation. And then when you come with the definitive answer for yourself, then you'll be able to build a definitive view for yourself, and you'll be able to be very certain about your view and your faith. So throughout the whole process of looking for the mind, I really hope that you should look at the mind in the way that is more than scholastic way, or looking at this whole text with an eye of looking for mistakes. This morning, I was talking to a manager, and we were looking at the photograph. At that time, the manager was looking at the photo with a scrutinizing eye, and he kept on criticizing the video, and the pictures, he started to pointing out that, oh, someone's dozing off, someone's looking at the cell phone, and someone's really distracted, someone's wearing a hat. But I myself, when I was looking at it, I thought that the sculpture is really beautiful in that picture, and the person even wearing the hat is very is also showing veneration. I started. When I was looking at the photograph, I looked at it from a very positive way, but when he looked at the photograph, he looked at it from a criticizing perspective and scrutinizing all the mistakes. In fact, I think this is how we should look at the text. In fact, I'm not praising myself by saying that I look at everything with positivity. I'm just saying that people have very different perspective, and we ourselves should look at our own intention and our own mentality when we are studying the sutra. I know lots of you are quite smart, and you have you gained lots of knowledge in your school, and you're very scholarly in many aspects. You've studied through high school, university, and got scholarships all the way through masters and even PhD. And if you were to use your wisdom to only scrutinize the mistakes within the sutras, in such a way, I think your studying of the Dharma won't succeed. So we should then look at the sutra with an attitude of faith. Then in this way, you will be able to build up your, you'll be able to succeed in the Dharma study. And there are people who just follow blindly, who have rather a superstition than faith with wisdom. So I think for such kind of people, it's quite important to develop the skills of analysis and more wisdom. In such a way, your faith will be grounded. So you can't be on the two extremes. Anyhow, there's a story that there's a book that's composed by Master Fa Xian, the journey to the countries of the Buddha. And a journey to the country of the Buddha. In fact, in that journey, in that journal that he composed, it says that he held incense and flowers, and he was at the Vulture's Peak, and he was making offerings of the flowers of incense and the lamps along with other bhikshus. And at that time, he remembered this is the place where the Buddha gave the teaching of Surangama Sutra. And upon thinking this, he started getting really emotional, and he started to cry. He thought that this is the place where the Buddha gave the teaching of such a profound sutra. However, now it is only left with these sites, and he himself never had the opportunity and the merit to listen to the teaching. And he stayed in the cave over there around the Vulture's Peak for one night. In that journey to the country of the Buddha, in fact, it is stated that the dates that Master Fa Xian looked at the sutra over there were earlier than the actual translation that was translated into Chinese language. So the translation was 750 CE, and Master Fa Xian's date was around 3 to 4 centuries CE. So he must have then looked or read into the Surangama Sutra. And another version stated that the text that he read over there was probably the Surangama Samadhi Sutra. So it is probably a different sutra that is read and chanted by Master Fa Xian. And on top of that, the Vulture Peak is a little bit far from the Jeta Grove, which was where Buddha gave the teaching of Surangama Sutra. It is also possible that the Buddha gave the teaching of a sutra in various places, and then it was later then compiled into one sutra. So that could also be possible. So it could be the Surangama Samadhi Sutra, or it could be the Sanskrit version of the Surangama Sutra, because Master Fa Hsien went abroad at the age of 65 and started to study the Sanskrit language, and then maybe at that time the text that he read at the time was the Sanskrit version of Surangama Sutra. So it could be either ways. I think when we're studying some text, we should then read extensively so that we can gather lots of information and we can make connections of certain information. Anyhow, I just wanted to share the story of Master Fa Hsien, who then chanted the Surangama Sutra at Vulture's Peak or Surangama Samadhi Sutra at Vulture's Peak. It could be either way. Now let's move on to the fifth attempt of searching out of the seven. Previously, we've already learned that mind is not out, it's not inside, is not looking inside or outside. And now Ananda started to say to the Buddha, said that I have heard the Buddha instruct the four assemblies, that because the mind, Buddha in fact addressed and instructed the assemblies that because the mind arises, then every kind of Dharma, every kind of phenomena then arises. And that because Dharma arises, then every kind of mind arises. So the Dharma here refers to all kinds of phenomena that disappears outside, the variety of manifestations and appearances that is on the outside. Because all the phenomena in fact manifest from mind, then it is because of that mind that then all phenomena would appear outside. And because of all kinds of Dharma would arise on the outside, then every kind of mind arises. For example, when you see something really lovely and cute, then you will have the desire that arises in your mind. And if there were something that is quite annoying, then you would probably have this kind of anger arise in your mind. And if you were to say something venerable outside, then you have the mind of admiration arise. So all kinds of things arise from the outside your mind, all kinds of mind would also arise. And then Ananda started to say that as I now consider it, so Ananda said that I've been thinking about it. He said that the substance of that very consideration is truly the nature of mind. So he said that, well, after consideration, there must be a mind. Wherever it comes together with things, then the mind exists in response. So there has to be the maturation of the cause and conditions, and in such a way, then the phenomena and the mind would arise. So before, as Ananda learned from the Buddha, saying that since the mind does not exist outside or inside, then he started to make this consideration, saying that, well, then the mind must then exist in response to the manifestation or the existence of the external phenomena. So he started to say then it must be that when the causes and conditions are both there, then the mind would also arise. So Ananda thinks that, in fact, the mind has substance, because Ananda did not understand that everything is illusory, everything is dreamlike. He grasped onto the existence of the mind or the phenomena. He felt that there's definitely something that is the solid substance that exists, that is just like how the scholars nowadays would think how mind or phenomena exists. And in such a way, he felt that there's no way for him to. In fact, at that time, Ananda did not really understand the illusory aspect or the dreamlike aspect of both mind and phenomena. So over here, he said that I think everything that appears based on the coming together of things. In Madhyamika, it talks about how the causes and conditions mature, or anywhere that is meet with causes and conditions, then there could be fruition. It's not like that at all. In fact, Ananda thinks that there is a solid existing substance that is the mind. So at that time, the Buddha then said to Ananda, saying that, now you say that because Dharma arises, every kind of mind arises. Wherever it comes together with things. So the Buddha started to refute him. In fact, in the sutra, it's not so easy to find where the refutation is. But over here, the Buddha asked him questions. So he asked this question. It says that wherever it comes together with things, the mind exists in response, isn't it? But if it has no substance, the mind cannot come together with anything. So Buddha asked that, do you think the mind exists as something that has substance? But so first of all, if the mind doesn't have substance, then the mind cannot come together or combine with anything. Previously, Ananda stated that, well, mind and phenomena comes as a cause and conditions, and in such a way the mind arises as a substance. And in such a way, then it won't happen. Why is that? Because then, if having no substance, it can yet come together with things that would constitute a 19th realm brought about by union with the 7th defiling object. In fact, there are only the 18 realms, and there is no 19th realm, just like how there is no horns for a rabbit. And if the mind is just like the horn of a rabbit that doesn't exist, then how can you say that it could mix with other phenomena? And if you were to say that the mind doesn't have any substance, then it's just like that you're talking about the 7th defiling object, because there are only 6 defiling objects, and now you're making up a 7th defiling object, and that is not possible, because when with the direct cognition, you cannot perceive it. And there is no such principle, and in such a way this is not possible. So that's the first refutation by the Buddha. The second refutation of the Buddha goes, if it does have substance, when you pinch your body with your hand, or if you were to touch your body, I think in some commentaries as a pinch, but in the Tibetan and the Chinese translation, it only talks about touching or in touch with your body by your hand. At that time, when you touch, then your body will definitely have a sense, will definitely feel it. Wherever your hand touches, then it will feel it on your body. And if it has such a feeling, does your mind which perceive it come out from the inside or from the outside? Does this kind of sense come from the inside of your body, or does this kind of feeling come from the outside of the body? So once you have the feeling, then the mind that feels it, does it come from the inside of your body or outside of your body? If it comes from the inside, then you've made a mistake, because once again, it should see within your body. It should be able to then perceive whatever are organs and whatever things that you have in your body, isn't it? We've already talked about it in the fourth refutation, so you cannot say that. And the second is that the second refutation within this is that if it comes from the outside, then you should be able to see your face first. If your mind is this knowing mind, comes from the outside, then the mind should also be able to see your face first. But this is not possible either. Because if you were to see your own face, then you have to look into a mirror, or your consciousness get out of your body and flying half in the air and then look back at your body. Then that's how you can see your face and perceive your own face. So over here, the Buddha talks from the two aspects. Does mind have a substance, and does mind, this substance of mind comes from inside or outside the body? And then Ananda said that, no, this is not what I meant. Ananda said that, in fact, seeing is done with the eyes, and consciousness and seeing is different. We usually say that whatever we see is the truth. So he said that seeing is done with the eyes. The mind's perception is not that of the eyes. To say it sees doesn't make sense. So his point was that when you're looking, then you're looking with your eyes. So he's saying that when you see, you don't really see with your mind, you see it with your eyes. So that's what is Ananda trying to differentiate. Therefore, when Buddha stated that if your mind is within or looking from outside, you should be able to see your own face or see the inside of your body, that doesn't make sense. So that's Ananda's clarification from his point of view. But the Buddha did not make a mistake as how Ananda assumed. The Buddha then said that to suppose that the eyes can see is like supposing that the doors of a room can see. So he said that, well, you think the eyes can see, isn't it? Then, since you're sitting in the room, your eyes are just like a door of a room. Could the doors see? As we stated before, the eyes are just like the crystals. And over here, the Buddha then used this analogy of the eyes are just like a door. And a person, that is the mind, sitting inside of the room, and the doors are the eyes. Then, do you see with your mind or your eyes? Also, if you were to say that it is the eye faculty that sees, then when someone has died, but his eyes are still intact and perfectly well, then his eyes should be able to see things, isn't it? And if the person who sees with the eye faculty, it is just like that you're saying that the doors could see, and a person who has died could also see. And if a person who's already dead and his eyes are still have this capacity of seeing, then how can it be death if one can still see? So if you were to say that the eyes are have the capacity to see, then you're saying that if someone who has already died could still use the eye faculty to see. In fact, this kind of analysis and this kind of argument is very similar to those of arguments made in Madhyamika and Buddhist logic, the Pramana teachings. If you were to say that the eye faculties are the ones who can perceive, then the ones who have the eye faculty should be able to see. If you were to say that you can both has both capacities of seeing and not seeing, then in such a way, you cannot say that you cannot say that, oh, this is something that this person could see and then not see at the same time, or it comes in it comes in phases. It's just like saying that a person in fact, this is a refutation made to argue with those of people who hold the existentialism view, where they see that everything exists as a materialistic existence, are the ones who could perceive. Then in such a way, you're just saying that the eye faculty are the ones who could perceive. And how about at the time when eyes cannot perceive? So you cannot really make such an argument. And in such a way, it is in such a way, it is in fact quite difficult to argue with. Back in 1999, until the time Phuntsogren Rinpoche passed into parinirvana, I translated simultaneously for him. Sometimes when Phuntsogren Rinpoche was giving the story halfway through, I've already finished the whole story because I'm very familiar with those stories. But sometimes when Phuntsogren Rinpoche gives a rather very foreign arguments and very foreign stories, and when some terms came up that I don't know how to translate, then I would get really lost. So simultaneous translation, on one hand, you don't have to wait for the translator to translate afterwards. You don't have to wait for the consecutive translation. However, simultaneous translation also have its flaws. Therefore, I'm not sure if the translators had made the Pramana analysis clearly to all of you. Ananda, if your knowing mind has substance, is that substance single or manifold? If your mind, which is aware, understands and knows, in fact has substance, then is it a single substance or many substances? The pramana or the analysis is in fact very similar to the previous one. So the logic is very similar. So he started to refute Ananda in 4 aspects. The first one is that is it one or only? Is the substance of mind is one or many? And does the substance perceive the body as it now resides in it, or does it not perceive it? And this mind that you perceive has is it everywhere or is it only at one place? So there are many ways of looking at it. So he started saying that when your hand is touching your foot, at that moment, if it were one, then you must have feel that your hand is touching all of your 4 limbs, just as if your hand is really cold and touching your other limbs. Then at that moment, your 4 limbs should all have the feeling of feeling cold. But how we in fact feel is that if one hand is touching another part of the limb, you probably would feel that it's cold on that certain part and not on the other limbs, isn't it? But according to the Buddha's refutation, if the mind is one, then you'll be able to perceive all of the feelings all together, because there's only one mind. Then you can't differentiate how the mind is over here at the hand or the different limbs. If you were to only touch your hand, if you were to only touch one part of the limb or other people's limb, then at the place of touching, you will feel, you have certain feelings, but not any other places. So it is definitely wrong to say that there's only one whole substance of mind that is pervasive all over the body. If your whole body have these feelings, because the body doesn't have this one feeling, therefore your proposal is wrong. Because wherever you would touch, you would feel the feelings at that particular place. So that's the first aspect of the refutation posed by the Buddha.
心如果是一体的话，那就不合理，就是这个观点。然后下面是第2个，就是如果堕体者，就是那个我们的这个心呢，就是有很多的这个体系呢，有很多的。
If this mind has manifold,
心就是很多的堕体的话呢，则成堕人，就是
it is not possible either, because if in such a way, then you're just saying that you have many minds. If you were to have many minds, then you're no longer one person, you're of many people in one of, in you. Then that's also not possible. If you were to say that your mind is manifold, you have a mind on your mind, on your limbs, and on your body, and so on. And in such a way, you're really saying that in one of your body, then it is split into many minds and therefore many people, and that is not possible either. You cannot point to which part of you is you. You cannot point to whether person A or mind A, B, C, D, E is you. Can you point to exactly which part is you? That is also not possible. The third one, it started saying that if the mind is all pervasive all over the body, is not possible either. Because if the mind is all-pervasive over the body, then it is the same as the previous argument. Then all your limbs should be having the same feeling at the same moment when you touch just one part. So that's not possible.
可能大家也应该，我们下面我在下面再讲吧。我先把这个讲完了以后，这个深处的这种感觉可能讲一下好一点。
I will then further elaborate of the feelings later after this part. The next one started saying that in fact the mind is only at one part. It is not all pervasive, but it is only at a certain part. But this is also not possible, because if I were to touch the top of your head and your foot at the same time, then do you only feel the touching at the head? Do you only feel my touching at your head, or both at your head and your foot then? Because your mind could only be at one place if there was a solid substance of mind, because it could only be at one place at a time. If you were touched by different kind of places, or at different kinds of places, just as when you're doing examinations, medical examinations, where you would have different tapes on your fingers, on your limbs, on your head, and on your knees, and so on. And then at that time, your mind should only feel one place that is then intact with your body, and you won't be able to feel the different sense of touches at the different places, isn't it? The neuroscience, in fact, they talk about how there are neurons, and there's a different kind of neurons would produce information and would produce different signals, and then transmute such signals. I think their way of looking at mind is different than Buddhism. In the commentary of Pramana, it talks about, in fact, the faculties could have the consciousness of different six faculties. They could then produce such kind, or they could feel at the same time. However, your deluded mind, that is thought, could only produce one thought at a time. So information could happen at the same time. Information could be received at the same time. You could then feel different kind of feelings at the same time. For example, if you were to have a headache at the same time you are having footache, then such kind of information could be received. However, your mind could only feel, or could only produce the thought of I am in pain, I am having headache at this one instant, and then the next instant you could shift your thought to, oh, I'm having footache as well. So it happens rather one thought at a time, rather than receiving all the information all at the same time. In Mipa Rinpoche's teaching, it is stated that, in fact, it doesn't matter how many objects there are on the outside, the perceiving capacities would also be there to receive all the information from the external objects. So all the senses that we have could perceive all the senses from the outside. For example, we can look at something really beautiful. At the same time, we can At the same time, we can feel our senses from our body. However, we cannot generate two kinds of thoughts at the same time, where maybe you're grasping towards the external object with your eye consciousness, but you cannot grasp that at the same time with your touches or your hearing senses and other senses. So Buddhism, in fact, is very logical. When the neuroscience talks about the receiving of the information, I think they have their areas of studies. However, when it comes to the consciousness and how our thoughts would grasp and how the consciousness work with the senses, then I think it is only Buddhism could explain that. We cannot produce jealousy at the same time with the kindness. And in fact, the mind has rather, I think in terms of how mind works and how thoughts are produced, I think it is the best to study Buddhist logic. I saw lots of our practitioners wanted to study Buddhism logic as well as Abhidharma, and the way I take it is that it's the most important to study Madhyamika. Of course, it is important to study the knowledge of Abhidharma and the Buddhism logic. I notice a majority of you applied to study Abhidharma. This is fine. In fact, Madhyamika, in my opinion, would be more important to study. I think all the 5 treatises are very important, and we should all have firm ground and foundations to study. We should be able to understand the mind and and all of these kind of teachings on mind are taught within Buddhist logic, and Abhidharma and the teachings on them are rather quite similar. So anyhow, it says that if you were to touch one part of your body, then you won't be able to hear the other parts of the body, which is not true. If you were to touch different places, then you would have different feelings at different places. You will feel different sense perceptions that you would feel the different senses of touching from different places, but at that one single time, you cannot have 2 different kinds of thoughts. So as previously how I stated, mind is not the production of cause and conditions. So that's the 5th one. The text that I have over here is the Emperor's edition, the Tianlong Emperor's edition of Surangama Sutra, and at the beginning of it, this version actually is printed in the Yunhe Palace in Beijing, and it looks like that. At the beginning of it, it has the prologue that is composed by Emperor Tianlong, and I think some of the content of the prologue are the same both in Chinese and Tibetan language, but the Chinese version is very difficult to understand. But the Tibetan version of this prologue is rather much easier to understand. So over here, I would like to just briefly share this prologue with you. So over here, it says that it expressed that Emperor Qianlong Emperor Qianlong stated that the majority of the Tripitakas are already in the Tibetan language, as Tibet is the center of between India and China for the Dharma teachings, for Dharma's for the Dharma. And Surangama Sutra, however, Surangama Sutra is not one of them. Surangama Sutra is not included in the Tibetan language. Why is that? It is because it is in fact because of Lama destroyed Buddhism at the time. He used the methods of burning and burying the sutra texts. Therefore, the text is lost in the Tibetan language. And Master Bhutan, who then made the prediction saying that after 500 years, the Tibetan version will be translated from Chinese language into the Tibetan language. And this was read by Rigpe Dorje, who was the country's master Zhangjia at that time. Not sure if it was in Sanskrit, but the book that was read by Rigpe Dorje, it described that this version would be then translated back into Tibetan language. And then Emperor Qianlong stated that, in fact, he got really busy with lots of the country affairs, the state affairs. However, whenever he gets any of the spare time for himself, he would then translate lots of the Chinese classics that is written in Chinese language into Manchurian. Also, upon contemplating that his grandfather, who was also not emperor, translated the Heart Sutra into 4 different languages, or kept the Heart Sutra into 4 different languages. And then at that time, his father also did the same. So because of their good example, he also wanted to translate the Surangama Sutra into 4 different languages, just as what his grandfather did for the Heart Sutra. But Heart Sutra was already translated into Tibetan language at that time, but Surangama Sutra was not. Therefore, he decided to translate the Surangama Sutra from Chinese language into Manchurian, and from Manchurian language into Mongolian language, and from Mongolian language into Tibetan language. And in such a way, he would fulfill the prediction that is made by Master Bhutan at that time. So he asked his relative, as well as Rigpe Dorje and a minister at that time, whose name is Furei, to study and to translate the Surangama Sutra. And at the end of each volume or each chapter of the Surangama Sutra, they have to send the text to the Emperor Qianlong, so that Qianlong would then read over their translation. Whatever question he would come up with at that time, he would then consult with Rinpoche Dorje at that time. So the translation was finished within 11 years, all the way from 1952 to 1963, 1752 to 1763. And at that time, his relative asked Emperor Qianlong to write a prologue. And upon writing a prologue, Emperor Qianlong started to think that, in fact, Surangama Sutra is a profound teaching that is given by Shakyamuni Buddha. And because of such profundity, if the translation is very difficult to understand, then in such a way, it would be rather difficult for people to uptake and to understand. There are monks who fight over for small wordings, for different ways of descriptions, for things that's rather unnecessary. Therefore, based on Emperor Qianlong's understanding, he felt that it is quite necessary to make sure that people could understand the Surangama Sutra easily. This is the principle that he required the translators. So he said that it is just like that you should gift food to the hungry and gift drinks to the thirsty, and in such a way the translation should be just like that, rather than making it really fancy and not fulfilling. Therefore, he asked the translators to translate without flowery wording and directly pointing to the meaning of the text. In such a way, the teaching would be useful and would be beneficial to the later generations. And he felt that this should be the way how the royal family should continue to propagate the sutras. And this prologue was composed back in 1763, October 18th. This was just my oral translation, and it was not really composed. I really hope that whenever you are doing your post-class discussion group, you should really read this, and you should think about how the previous royal families, the kings and the ministers, invested lots of time and energy into the teachings and the sutras of the Buddha, the teachings of the Buddha. So now let's move to the sixth one, the sixth attempt of looking for the mind. Let's finish it today. Over here, then Ananda said to the Buddha, he continued to pose the question to the Buddha. He said that a world-honored one also have heard the Buddha discuss the true appearance with Manjushri and other great disciples, other great bodhisattvas. And during the discussion of the ultimate truth, I've heard that you, world-honored one, has also said the mind is not inside and it's not outside. And now, as I consider it, if it were within, it would see things it does not see. If it were outside, if it were inside, then it would see things it does not see, such as the bowels and the stomach and all the organs within. If it were outside, then that would be no common. There would be no common perception. Different commentaries by Master Changshui, Master Jiaoguang in their explanation, where it talks about there is nothing. It could see things it does not see, and on the outside there will be no common perceptions. I think their translations are rather a little bit different in Chinese, but the meaning is not much of a difference. Since it cannot see inside, you cannot see the organs, isn't it? It cannot be inside. Over here, Ananda started to explain the teaching of the Buddha, saying that because we cannot see what's inside, then it cannot be inside. And since the body and the mind have common perception, rather than saying that it is two minds, two big shoes that does not know each other, or does not then have the common perception of each other. So it does not make sense to say that it is outside. Therefore, since there is a common perception, and since there is no seeing within, it must be in the middle. Previously, the Buddha already refuted the point, the proposal of Ananda, saying that the mind is within. And then also already refuted Ananda's idea, saying that the mind is outside. So at that time, then Ananda started to say that this must be in the middle. And then in the middle part, Ananda also leaning towards that middle, closer to the outside part. So let's now look at this. It is not inside, it is not outside, but it is somewhere on the outside, but also in the middle. That's his point of view. And now the Buddha started to refute him. According to Master Oi's commentary, he said that the mind is not outside, not inside. And then Ananda must have this perception that the mind has a true substance that resides somewhere in the middle, somewhere within. He grasped onto that the mind has a true substance, has a true characteristic. Just as I think how majority of people, they also hold on to that there is a true existence of mind. In fact, the mind in the relative truth, it is dreamlike and illusion-like, but in its ultimate reality, it is not existent at all. It is completely empty. And then over here, the Buddha replied to Ananda, saying that you say it is in the middle, then you cannot be so vague about it. You have to make it very clear. If you were to say that it's in the middle, then you have to find a fixed location for it. You have to find somewhere very specific for it. Because if it's in the middle, then you're pointing to a specific location, and you cannot say that there's nowhere to be found in the middle. When people talk about middle, we usually would think about it is sandwiched between inside and outside. It must be sandwiched between one and the other. So over here, the Buddha started to ask that then where is the middle that you're proposing? Is it in an external place? Is it in the middle of a pillar? Is it in between two places? Is it in between Nepal and India? Is it in between Yunnan and Sichuan province? Or is it in the body? Is it somewhere sandwiched between the faculty and another body part? If you were to say that it is in the middle of the body, it could not be on the surface of the body since it is not in the middle. Because if you were to say that it's somewhere on the skin, somewhere in between the skin, that's on the outside of the body. If you were to say that the mind is somewhere attached to the body on the outside, then that is on the outside of the body. If you were to say that this is somewhere inside of the body, if you were to say that is inside of your flesh, inside of your bone, inside of your organ, then it goes back to the previous logic that we've already discussed. So it doesn't work. Then is it in the middle of your body? Is it in the middle of somewhere else? If it were somewhere outside, I think it is the best for people who have studied the Buddhist logic to study this. Otherwise, you'll get completely lost. For me, myself, this is easy. For people who studied Buddhist logic, I think you have lots of faith and lots of enthusiasm. And I noticed that lots of people who studied the Buddhist logic and the way when they were doing their after-class presentation, they were very happy. They were almost jumping up during their presentation. Anyhow, if you were to say that it is in the middle of some place, then could you find a reference? Could you find a reference point? Could you find a fixed location? Could you find a point, a reference point? Is there a reference point? Because if you were to say that there is no reference point, then you were to say that it is just like the son of a barren woman that doesn't exist. Or if you were to say that it is in the middle of the two dharmas that doesn't exist, then you were to say that this so-called fixed location is just like the space. And if you were to say that it is at the place of the marker of the reference point, then let's contemplate on the reference point, because people make the reference point with their references, because we have to. Because if you were to say that this is the middle and this is your reference point, but you are. But when regarded from the east, it will be to the west, and when regarded from the south, it will be the north. If we were to place a reference point on the east, then we would say that this is between the east and west. But for Westerners, they would feel that it's rather on the east. But for people from the south, they would feel that it's actually on the north. Over here, when we talk about the Americans as Westerners, they would say that I'm not a Westerner. In fact, you're on the west side of me. Especially when we look at the globe as a sphere, we cannot say that this is definitively on the west of you or on the east of you. The reference point also moves. There is no fixed point for a reference point. If we were to have a fixed point, a fixed reference point, then we cannot make any of the references anymore. So everything is really changeable because we're using reference points because we're using individual reference points, and that is not fixed. And if you were to say that the west and east, or if you were to set any kind of reference point to make a mark for yourself, then it could make everyone else really confused, because everyone's reference points are very different. There's no definitive reference
第二个
point.
方面呢，就是
So that's
阿
the
难就是
first
当时说，
refutation,
我
and the
说的
second
这个所谓的
refutation
中
is
间呢，
that
就是不是三面的什么东来西
and
北啊，不是这
then
个中
Ananda
间，
started to
应
explain
该
for
是这
himself.
个
He
佛陀
said
你
that the
所说
middle
的
I
这
speak
个
of
言
is
和
neither
色
of
呢，就是
those.
未愿的
As
话，就是
the world
参参这
honored
个
one
色
has said,
啊，
the
就是言呢
eyes
就是
and
作为这
forms
个在
are
上
of the
的，
conditions
然
which
色呢
create
就是作
eye
为所缘
consciousness.
缘，
The
最
eyes
后的话
makes
呢，就是依靠这个生
discriminations.
物见缘呢，
Form
参
has
生
no
这个参
perception,
生这个厌
but
世
a
的，所以这是我
consciousness
们
is
因明会不
created
管
between them,
什
and
么
this
居
is
士
where
论都
my
是这样
mind
讲
is.
的嘛，就是
This
那么这个依靠
statement
厌
is
和那
rather
个色
from
啊，这
the
个参
Buddhist
生的话
logic
呢，
and
那这个色是
Abhidharma.
可以有的。那这个色
So
呢是
when
什么样
eyes
呢？它
and
下面讲
forms
眼呢
are
就
the
是有分
conditions
别
which
的啊，就
create
是它跟
the
你
eye
一般来
consciousness.
讲，我们这个眼是没有分别的。
In
眼
fact,
识呢，就是
eye
眼识这个
faculty
眼识也
doesn't
没有
have
分别，所
any
以这个眼识呢，就是
differentiation. It
用这
doesn't
个
have
心
any
识加入的
discriminations.
思维呢，
Eye
就是它有
consciousness
分别的。但
doesn't
是在
have
这里可
any
能是它有
discriminations.
你
It is
你明分
only
啊，
that
就是它
the
可能
conscious
眼是这
the
个，因为呢执着对境的嘛，就是
the
它能看
conceptual
到的
mind
东西，
that
它
makes
可
the
能从这个层面讲。
discriminations.
所以眼呢
But
就是
over
有分
here,
别的，然后尘呢就是色尘呢就是
it
没有
says
分
that
别
the
的。
eye
然后这
doesn't
个
have
中间的这个
discrimination.
心识呢，就是可以
The
在架在中间，就是
forms
可以
on the
参
outside
圣的。其实
doesn't have
其实
any
这个可能
discriminations.
在什么实量论，实量论当中也是会破的，就是还有我们的那个
This
智慧品里
kind
面
of
也会破的，就是对方的
teachings,
观点
this
是。
kind of
那个
ideas
焦光呢，就是他
are
说是虽然那个阿
then
难呢就是特别
detailedly
多问题的，但是他就
refuted
听不懂，
in
就是这
the
个佛陀的
wisdom
缘起法。
chapter
他
of
解释的也是对的，他
Bodhisattva
说是这些
Charyavatara
知
as
识
well
就是
as the
光文多
commentary
学的人
on
都有一
the
个统一的，
Pramana.
他们都就是
In fact,
要么是在外面，
Ananda
要么是
says
在内面，
he
就
is
是
the
他虽然是
foremost
光
in
文多学，
listening
但
to
有
the
时候
Dharma
你
and,
看他确
and
实光文多
extensive
学，就
in
是他
learning,
一会儿
but
说是对
he
四众弟子怎么讲的，你
grasped
对文殊菩萨怎
onto
么讲的，
certain
然后
things
你对那
and he
个
used his
后面也
conceptual
会说
mind
这个
to
什么这个后面就是什
he
么目
and
犍
he
连
used
呐，
lots
就
of
是
his
什么富路呐，
conceptual
就是这
mind
些也是这么讲的。反正他在
and
所
did
有的，
not
就像我们
really
现在
truly
的学学
understand
一
the
样，就是这个
meanings.
书里面怎么说的，那个书里面怎么
Just
说的，
as he
他就把
quoted from
这
the
些
Buddha, and
文
later
字
he
和
would
一些数
quote
字的话呢，就是
Purna,
他完
and
全
he
都浪
quoted
费不到。
the
但是
teaching of
里
the
面的
Buddha
真正的有
to
一些很深
the
深的意义的话呢，
Bodhisattvas,
他不懂。
and
所
he
以
read a
这
lot
个
and he
我们
heard
这
a
个学
lot,
术界的
but
人
the
呐，应
details
该要
of
想一
the
想，
teachings are
千
not
万
grasped,
千万不要
but
学
the
阿难。
but the essence of the teaching is not really understood of by Ananda, just
阿难
like
是他说
the
是这个虽然
scholars
是多问，
nowadays. I
但是
really
他
hope
听不
that
懂
the
这个
scholars
不懂
are
这个。
not like Ananda.
也说的是对的，你看他认为是这个色和那个根中间的话，那就是有
See,
一个
he
色，
thinks
这个
that
是颜色，
between the
所以
form
形上
and
还是
eyes,
在
and
中
there
间，他都不
is
知道什么叫
in
颜
the
色，
middle of
所
that
以
there's
他这里就是这样讲的。然后
there's a
佛陀就
consciousness.
下面就
In
开
fact,
始
he
破他
doesn't
的
really
观念，
understand what
破
he's
他的观
saying,
念的话呢，就是也
and
是
the Buddha
这个
started
地
to
方稍微
refute
大
him.
家还是也要专注一
In
下，也
this
稍微
part, I
难懂一
really
点，
hope
是吧？
you could focus, otherwise
怎么
it's
说呢？
quite
意思
difficult
就
to
是说，刚才
understand.
不是说这个样，根和尘中间呢，就是要有一个
It
是
says
念
that, in fact,
所以心是
between
存在
the
的。
eye
那么
and
下面就是
object,
佛陀就
there
开始
is,
破
if you
它
were
的
to think that
这
your
个
mind
如
is
心
in
呢，
the
就是
middle
落在
of
这
the
个根
eye
尘
and
中
an
间的，
object
你
is
的这个
between
心
the
呢，
eye and
如
an
果跟
object,
眼根和那个外面的色法就是中间的话呢，那么这个心呢，
then does
这
the
个心呢，
mind's
就是为
substance
这个
combine
不
with
现
the
而
two
呢，
or
就是
doesn't?
不为这个相而就是他这里的意思呢，就是说是这个你的这个心呢，就是不是在中间嘛？那中间
Since
的
your
话呢，
mind
就是
is
是
in
不
the
是
middle,
跟那个根和尘呢，就是都有关系呢？还
but
是这
then
个
does your
根和
mind
尘呢，就是
mix
这
or
两者都是没
combine
有
or
关系
cling
的？它这
to
里
the
这
eye or the
个
object?
对见的话呢，就是藏文里面就是都一气嘛，同时嘛。
In the Tibetan
或者说是都一
translation, it
气
says
联
that
系嘛，有
does
联系嘛，就
the
是可能这
mind
个意思，不
then
然
make a
有点难弄
connection
一点。
to the
那么
eye, or does the
我们
mind
先说这个
makes
关系
the
吧，就是
a
如果
connection
这
to the
个
object that
如
the
果
eye
呢，就是对
perceives?
这个根和尘呢，就是这两者都有关系，对吧？就是
If
就是
it
对二
if
者
the
都有
mind
这个
did
见，一
combine combine with both of them,
这样的话呢，就是
then object and mind substance would form a chaotic mixture.
还有呢，就是无非这个体质。
Since object has no perception, while the substance has perception, the two would stand in opposition. Which is the middle? Could you find where the middle is?
那么根和这个对境呢都杂乱，就是为什么呢？因为这个心
，Why is that?
既跟这个外面的尘有关系。
The mind has a connection or has a relationship with the I and has a relationship with object. And then the mind must have both
这样的话，
the element of
心是会
object
更
and
还有
elements
呢，
of
这三者的话
the
呢，
I.
完全的就成了这个对
And
立
then
的，
all
就
three
这样
are
对立的
mixed,
话呢，
but
怎
these
么会
two
是成立就是互相
would
的有
stand
关
in
系呢？
opposition.
根本不可能的。
How
所以
could then
这个地方呢，
have
大家也
any
要
kind
好
of
好的这个
relationship?
思考一下，思考什么呢？我们大
You
多数的
should
认为
think
呢，
upon
就是
this.
对境是这个
Because
境存
majority
在
of the
的，成立。
time
然
we
而
would
眼
consider
睛呢，
that
就是
the
让这
object
个
truly
眼根就是
exists.
存在的。
And
然后呢，
our
就还有一个
eyes
性是，就是
are
任何
existent.
之间就是有
And
一个性
between
质。
our
其实
eyes
这个学过居士
and
和学过
the
英语的人呢，
object,
就是
there is
都
a mind.
都知道根本不可能。虽然这个
For people who
外境呢，就是作为一
studied
个所缘缘，
Abhidharma,
然后依靠它
they
呢，
would
就是
feel that
眼根
this
呢，
is
就是
completely,
起一
this
个
is
增上缘
impossible.
的
This
作
is
用。
definitely
然后
impossible.
依靠这两个
Because
因
the
缘呢，
eyes
产生这个厌识，就是这个是我们基本的规律。
the
但是
eyes
阿难呢，
as
就是因为不知
the
道，阿
cause
难
and
就是
then
所谓的
the
厌识呢，
object
应该
as
是
a
在根本
condition,
中
then
间存在的。
over
所以
there, because
哪
of
有这
the
样的，就是
cause
这
and
个不合理
condition,
的，对吧？如果这样的
then
话呢，那
you'll
我
be
们的
able
这
to
个
see.
厌识
But
呢，
then
也有
over here,
根的一部
Ananda
分，也
saying
有
that
成的
in
一
the
部分
middle
的。
of
就
I
然后
and
这根的一
in the
部分呢，
middle
跟
between
跟
the
这个
I
混
and
在一起，
object, there
成的
is
一
the
部分呢，
mind.
就是
How could
跟
that be
尘混在
possible?
一起。这样的话，
And
厌识呢，就
Ananda's
是也有
idea
这个
is
设法
that
的，
the
就是
mind
无
has
无无
partially
知的
that
这
is
个
the mind
一
and
部分，也
partially
有
that
根
is
的
the
这个
object.
能见的，就是一部分。
So
跟
you
跟
have
他自己呢，就
partial,
是什
so
么
the
本体都没
mind
有的
is
一部分的话
partially
呢，
the
那完全
perceiver
是
and
自己心
partially
境。
the
其实由始
perceived.
终就是这样的，就是他们都一
In
定要
fact,
有一个东西，就是让通过试验出
for
来的。
the
那
kind
这
of
样的话
people
呢，
who grasp
你的这
onto
个
solid
根识的话呢，就是
existence,
就全部都是
they
混为
that's
一
how
谈
they
的。那
perceive.
如果这
And
样的
in
话呢，
such a
你看
way
那个
then
尘
everything
和
would be
根呢，就
very
是又混在一起
chaotically
了。
mixed.
然后这个
You're mixing
尘
up
和那个岩石
everything
是呢又
together.
混在一起。尘
Because
和
your mind
什
is
么
then
那个
mixed
还有
with the
是
I
跟那
and
个
with
根呢，就是
the
又混在一
object.
起。这三个法呢，就
All
是
three
就最
are
后
all
混在一
mixed
起的话呢，
together.
那就你根本不知道是哪
And
个是
in
是，
such
哪
a
个
way
是
you
境，
don't,
哪个是
you
根。
can't really
如果你
differentiate
没有这
where
样的话呢，
is
那一
the
起练习是没办
consciousness
法的。
and
如果
where's
同一
the
个时间
the
当中，
mind
这
and
三者
where's
都
the
一起要
I.
练习的话呢，那最后
Where's the
所谓的
object?
厌识到底是它是一个心识呢，还是一种这
Is
个
the
无情法
mind,
呢，还是一种
is
这
the
个
I a
什么东西
mind?
呢？
Is the
就是
I
根本
an
没办法的。
object?
所以
Is the
这
mind
个
is the
一个是
I
这个非常对立的，就是这几个法呢，就是能取也好，索取
an
也好，或
inanimate
者是根也
subject
好，尘也好，
object?
这些呢就是全部都在混在
So
一起的话呢，
all of
那就是
if
不合理
all
的。
of
啊，就
them
是
are
刚才那
mixed
个。
together, then this doesn't
无
make
非呢
any
就是应该
sense.
是指的是根，就是然后那个体质呢就指的是这个境吧。就如果这样的话呢，就是这全部是对立的，就是它是这个
If
对
it
立的
were
话呢，就是
mixed
全部都怎么
together,
会是变成就一起拥有呢？就是没办法。
since object has no perception while
第二个
substance
方面呢，
has
就是不是
perception,
这
then the
个
two
一
would
起
stand
的，
in
不是这个
opposition.
合在一起的
Then
话呢，
it
那么就是
can't happen at all.
非啊就是
You
质
can't
不
find
质
even the
啊，
middle,
那么这个
and
时候呢，
everything
就是
would be
可以说是
mixed
非质和
together.
非不质。
The next
它这
one
里
is that
非
if
质和
it
非不质呢，就是
if it
因为
did
它
not
不是在一
combine
起
with the
如
two,
果不是在一
it
起的
would
话呢，
then
就是
be
根
neither
呢，
perceiver
它
nor
不是这
perceived
个
and
尘
would
的，
have
尘
no
呢就是不
substance
是根。
or
那么
nature.
心呢，就是也并不是在
Because
跟它这个
object
一起。
is not
如果心跟
I
尘不在
is
一
not
起，
the I
心跟
and
那个根不在一起，或者是
the
心呢跟
mind
三者
is
不在一起的话呢，
not
那怎么会是它有一种体系呢？就是根本没有体
mixed
系。
with
所以在那
neither
个
the
时候呢，
I
就是怎么
nor
叫
the
中间呢？
the
所以
object.
用我们这个观察
It
的
is
大
not
家
mixed
应
with
该
any.
应该明白了
And
吧？
then
就
how could
是
you
它的这
say
个所谓的是吧？就是这个
where
尘
would the
和
characteristic
尘
of
和
middle
尘
be?
和这个根
How could
中
you say
间有
there's
没
a
有
middle?
性，就是这个很容易的。尘和
It's
根之
quite
间有
easy
联
to
系的方式呢，
differentiate
不可
the
能有的。
I
如果
and
它们
object
三者有联
between
系的
these
方式的
two.
话，
Is
全部
there
都混
a
为一谈，
mind?
就是简单来说的话。
And how can
如
you
果
mix all
尘
three
和根就
together?
是一点关系
If
都没有，
the
中
I
间这样的
and
话呢，那就
object
是
doesn't have
心
any
就
relationships,
变成无体了，因为它跟那个
then
根和尘都没有什么关系了。
the
那
mind
这是
would
对方也
be
不能承
a
认的。所以
solid
你所谓
or
的这
would
个
be
重呢，就是
isolated
到底在哪里？
existence in
这
the
个
middle, and it doesn't
应该明
make
白了
any connections. Did you understand?
不明白也没办法，我就那么
It's okay if you
大家
don't
这样
understand. I can't do much because I've already tried my best to explain it to you. 是吧？可以了吧？ We've finished, right? So over here, therefore you should know that for the mind to be in the middle is impossible. What are you laughing at? You do not understand.